The night seemed calm like any other. My daughter's husband, Mark, and I were enjoying a quiet evening at home when everything changed in an instant. The doorbell rang, but what we didn't know was that the person on the other side had a mission that would alter our lives forever. As I opened the door, Karen, the notorious HOA manager from our neighborhood, stormed in with a look that could freeze anyone in their tracks. Words were exchanged. But before we could comprehend what was happening, the unthinkable occurred. In a split second, Karen drew a gun and fired it straight at Mark. The chaos that followed left us in disbelief. But what Karen didn't know, what she could never have predicted, was that I wasn't just a concerned father-in-law. I wasn't just a bystander. I was an FBI agent, and this wasn't just a random shooting. It was about to become the biggest case of my life. What followed was a journey of secrets, lies, and a deadly confrontation that no one, not even Karen, saw coming. I had always thought of our neighborhood as peaceful, a place where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a steady, calm pace. My daughter, Grace, and her husband, Mark, had just settled into their new home. Mark, a soft-spoken and kind-hearted man, always tried to make things work, and Grace, my daughter, was content in her new life with him. But things began to take a turn when we crossed paths with Karen, the HOA manager. Karen wasn't your typical neighbor. She held her position as if it were a throne and believed everyone should bow to her will. Her role as HOA manager gave her a sense of power that was completely disproportionate to what was necessary for managing a neighborhood. From the very beginning, she clashed with us over the smallest things: an incorrectly placed flower pot here, an unapproved paint color there. Her constant complaints and threats began to make us feel like we were living under a microscope. What started as minor annoyances quickly escalated into something far more sinister. As much as I tried to maintain peace and keep Grace's home a sanctuary, Karen made it impossible. Her attitude was overbearing, and no matter how much I tried to ignore her, her constant presence began to chip away at our sense of security. Tensions built, and it was only a matter of time before the situation would explode. Little did I know, that day wasn't too far off. I had no idea how far Karen would go to enforce her perceived authority, but as things unraveled, it became clear that this was no longer just about neighborhood rules. It was a matter of survival. And in the blink of an eye, everything would change. It all happened so quickly. One moment, the house was quiet, filled with the warmth of a typical evening, and the next, it was a scene of unimaginable horror. We had just finished dinner, Mark and I sitting in the living room while Grace went upstairs to tend to some work. The clock ticked in the background, and everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful, almost. But that calm was shattered when the doorbell rang, the sound cutting through the air like a sharp knife. I opened the door, expecting perhaps a neighbor or someone with a simple question. But standing there was Karen, her face twisted with a fury I'd never seen before. She had been a thorn in our side for months, but tonight, her rage seemed palpable, more than just the petty grievances over lawn care or fence height. Her eyes were wild, filled with a determination that felt dangerous. Before I could even speak, she pushed past me, shoving the door open with enough force that it slammed against the wall. "You think you can ignore me? You think you can break every rule without consequences?" she yelled, her voice trembling with anger. I tried to reason with her to get her to leave, to calm down, but she was beyond listening. "I've had enough of your disrespect," she screamed, her voice growing louder. In the blink of an eye, she reached under her jacket and pulled out a gun. The cold steel of it gleamed in the dim light, and my heart stopped. My body froze in shock, unable to fully comprehend what was happening. "Karen, no!" I shouted, stepping forward in an instinctive attempt to protect Mark, who was now standing by the staircase. But it was too late. Without a word, Karen raised the gun and fired. The deafening sound of the gunshot echoed through the house, and my mind struggled to process the impact. Mark's body jerked violently, and he crumpled to the floor in a heap, a loud thud as he hit the ground. Blood started to pool around him, staining the carpet as it spread. each drop making the reality of the situation hit harder. The room, which had once felt so safe, turned into a nightmare. Grace's scream from upstairs shattered the already fragile air in the house. She came rushing down, eyes wide with horror as she saw her husband lying motionless on the floor, the crimson stain growing larger. Her voice, filled with panic and disbelief, was the only sound I could hear aside from my own racing heartbeat. I dropped to my knees beside Mark, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. His breathing was shallow, faint. His once strong and comforting presence was now replaced by something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I couldn't lose him. Not like this. I heard Karen laugh, her tone twisted, almost as if she had won. "That'll teach you to mess with me," she spat, her voice cold and heartless. But in that moment, something snapped inside me. I was no longer just a helpless bystander. I wasn't just someone's father or father-in-law anymore. The FBI agent within me came to life, a flood of focus and determination rushing through me. I couldn't let this end here. I couldn't let her get away with it. As I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking with adrenaline and disbelief, I dialed the number with precision, my voice steady despite the chaos. "This is Agent. Your name? I need immediate backup. I've got a shooting, and I'm going after the suspect." In those few seconds, everything changed. What started as a random act of violence was now something much bigger. I wasn't just about to save my son-in-law. I was about to expose a side of Karen that no one, not even she, could have ever expected. The moment the gunshot rang out, time seemed to stretch into infinity. My mind refused to believe what had just happened. Mark was on the floor, his body unmoving, blood seeping into the carpet. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears, as if it were the only sound left in the world. Grace's scream from upstairs was the only other noise that pierced the fog of shock, but it was distant, like it came from someone else's nightmare. I dropped to my knees beside Mark, frantically checking his pulse, hoping for some sign that he was still alive, that this wasn't real. But his body was cold, his chest barely rising. Panic set in as I realized I had no idea what to do next. Every second felt like a lifetime. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, praying it wouldn't take too long to call for help. "Mark, hold on. Please just hold on," I whispered, though I knew he couldn't hear me. My voice cracked with fear, the overwhelming sense of helplessness almost too much to bear. But then, in the chaos, something clicked inside me. The FBI agent within me that had lain dormant for so long surged forward. This wasn't just an attack. This wasn't some random act of violence. This was something far deeper, far more dangerous. Karen hadn't just crossed a line. She had set something in motion that I couldn't ignore. I pulled my phone from my pocket, dialing with urgency, my hands trembling as I keyed in the numbers. "This is Agent. Your name? I need immediate backup. We've had a shooting and I need you here now." The moment I said those words, everything changed. The weight of the situation came crashing down on me, but with it, a new clarity. I wasn't just some father-in-law trying to keep the peace anymore. I was an agent, and Karen had just made a huge mistake. I could feel my mind shifting into overdrive as I spoke to dispatch. I wasn't just giving them details about a shooting. I was setting up a case. I was preparing for what was about to unfold. The tension in the air grew thick, each second stretching longer than the last as I waited for the backup I'd requested. "Stay calm, sir," the dispatcher said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Units are on the way." But Karen wasn't done. She hadn't left yet. I could hear her footsteps, heavy and deliberate, as she moved around the house, her presence still filling the space with an unnerving tension. I turned my attention back to Mark, trying to keep myself together as I applied pressure to his wound, doing everything I could to stop the bleeding. My thoughts raced. Was he going to survive this? Was I going to be able to save him? Grace appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide with terror as she took in the scene below. She hesitated, her body frozen with shock, unable to process what she was seeing. "Dad, what happened? Is Mark okay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, Grace. I don't know. But We need to get him help. Now, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The words tasted like gravel in my mouth, because the truth was, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if Mark would make it. I wasn't sure if any of us would be okay after this. Karen's voice interrupted the stillness, cold and mocking. You think calling for help will save him? She sneered. It's too late. There's nothing you can do now. Her footsteps grew louder, and I knew she was circling us, still enjoying the chaos she had created. I gritted my teeth. This isn't over, Karen. I said, trying to sound more certain than I felt. I'll make sure you pay for this. The sound of sirens in the distance reached my ears, growing louder as they approached. I knew the cavalry was on its way, but the seconds still felt like hours. Every minute I spent here with Mark, every moment that passed, felt like it could be his last. I turned to Grace, my face set in determination. Get to the back of the house. Lock the doors, and don't open them until the officers arrive. I don't want you anywhere near her. I ordered, my voice firm with the authority I had long buried beneath the surface. Grace didn't hesitate. She nodded, her face pale, but resolute, and quickly disappeared toward the back of the house. I returned my focus to Mark, applying pressure to his wound with everything I had. I could feel the heat of the blood, the weight of the situation crushing me, but I refused to give in to the fear. I wasn't going to lose him. Not like this. The sirens grew louder, and soon, the sound of tires screeching to a halt outside signaled that the backup had arrived. The officers rushed in, their voices sharp as they moved quickly, securing the house and taking control of the scene. The chaos was finally being contained, but it felt like I was still trapped in a nightmare. As the paramedics worked on Mark, I finally turned to the officer in charge, my expression hard. This isn't just a shooting, I said, my voice low but firm. This was a setup. Karen's not just some angry neighbor. She's involved in something much bigger. The officer's gaze hardened as he nodded. We'll take it from here, Agent, your name? And just like that, the situation shifted. This wasn't just a random act of violence anymore. It was a case, one that would change everything for me, my family, and for Karen, who had just crossed a line she would never be able to undo. After the chaos of the shooting, the immediate fear subsided, only to be replaced by an urgent need for answers. Mark had been rushed to the hospital, and Grace was safe, though shaken to the core. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me, but I had no time to grieve or even process what had just happened. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was something much more deliberate, something much darker. Karen had planned this. She had been building to this moment, and I needed to figure out why. Once the police secured the scene, I knew I had to move fast. The FBI's resources were at my disposal, but I didn't have the luxury of waiting for official channels to do their work. This was personal. I couldn't let it go, not after what she'd done. My training kicked in, and I began to pull together every scrap of information I could about Karen, her background, and any connection she might have had to the shooting. First, I started with her records. I pulled her criminal history, but there was nothing substantial. No past violent offenses, no charges that would explain this outburst. On the surface, she seemed to be nothing more than a woman who had overstepped her bounds as an HOA manager. But that didn't add up. It didn't explain the violence, the premeditation, or the cold-bloodedness with which she'd acted. I expanded my search. I contacted my colleagues in the FBI to help me dig deeper into her financial records and personal connections. A few hours into the investigation, one of my colleagues flagged something odd. Karen's name had appeared on several documents related to real estate transactions in the neighborhood. She had been involved in the buying and selling of properties, but it wasn't the kind of business that would be typically associated with an HOA manager. And there was more. Karen had been seen frequently meeting with a number of high-profile individuals, all of whom had ties to powerful local real estate developers. I dove deeper into these transactions. It wasn't just that Karen was flipping houses. The properties she had been involved in were tied to developers with questionable reputations, people with histories of bribery, corruption, and illegal land deals. These developers weren't just interested in building houses. They were after land. land that they could develop without restrictions, without oversight. And that's when the pieces began to fall into place. Karen wasn't just a rogue HOA manager with a bad temper. She was a key player in a much larger scheme, one that revolved around manipulating property values and using her position to bypass regulations. The HOA was a convenient front for her. She used her power to keep residents in check, ensuring that properties were undervalued so they could be bought up cheaply. But when anyone stood in her way, when they began to challenge the flow of money, she took drastic measures. I dug through more records, piecing together evidence that showed Karen's connections to organized crime, her secret meetings with developers who used underhanded tactics, and her growing involvement in a web of corruption that reached far beyond the neighborhood. This wasn't just about property. It was about power, about manipulating people, using fear, and controlling everything and everyone around her. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how far-reaching her influence was. Her involvement in real estate was a cover for a much more sinister agenda. Karen had been manipulating not just property values, but entire lives. She had systematically taken control of the community, using her position to make life unbearable for anyone who stood up to her. But what had made her snap? Why had she decided to shoot Mark? The answer came when I discovered a hidden file on her computer, an email exchange between Karen and one of the developers she was working with. The email was a threat, a demand for compliance. Mark had been a whistleblower. He had uncovered some of Karen's dirty deals and was planning to report her to the authorities. When Karen found out about his plan, she saw him as a threat, someone who could expose everything she had worked so hard to hide. In that moment, everything clicked. Karen hadn't just shot Mark out of anger. She had done it to protect herself, to silence him before he could unravel her entire operation. And that's when the true extent of her deception hit me. She was playing a dangerous game, and Mark was just one casualty in a much bigger battle. I felt a wave of determination wash over me. This wasn't just about protecting my family anymore. This was about exposing everything Karen had been hiding for years, about putting an end to her reign of manipulation and terror. I called in the full force of the FBI, organizing a team to help me take down Karen and the developers who had been working with her. We would need hard evidence, testimonies, and full cooperation from those who had been silenced by fear, but I was confident we could bring it all down. But the investigation wasn't over. Far from it. As I dug deeper, I began to uncover more pieces of the puzzle, more victims, more lives that Karen had destroyed along the way. And with every revelation, I grew more determined. This was personal, yes, but it was also something much bigger than just me. It was about justice, about stopping a corrupt system that had been allowed to thrive unchecked. With the help of the FBI, we moved fast, gathering evidence, connecting the dots between Karen's real estate empire and the criminal activities that had funded it. We made arrests, uncovered hidden bank accounts, and brought in witnesses who had been too afraid to speak out. And as the web of corruption began to unravel, Karen's world started to collapse. She was no longer the untouchable HOA manager. She was a criminal caught in a system of her own making. In the end, it wasn't just about taking down one person. It was about showing the world the power of justice, of standing up to corruption, no matter how deeply entrenched it may be. The truth had been revealed, and Karen's secrets were no longer safe. And as I watched her be led away in handcuffs, I knew that my family and my neighborhood were finally free from her grasp. The final confrontation with Karen felt like the culmination of a long, drawn-out battle. The weeks of investigation, the mounting pressure, the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together, it had all led to this moment. As the FBI closed in on her, everything we had uncovered about Karen's criminal activities, her manipulation, her greed, and the lives she had destroyed was about to come to light. But as the door to her world began to close, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The nightmare we had been living was finally going to end. The moment of reckoning came on a cold morning, just a few days after we had pieced everything together. I was standing with my team, each of us ready to bring down Karen and her accomplices. The weight of what we were about to do, the lives we were about to change, pressed on me. For months, Karen had controlled the lives of the people in our community, my family included. Her ability to manipulate, to inflict fear, had made her seem invincible. But today, she was just another criminal. We moved in quickly, swarming her house with federal agents and local law enforcement. There was no hesitation in our steps, no second thoughts about the power we held in that moment. I was in the front line, knowing that it wasn't just about arresting her. It was about making sure she never hurt anyone again, about making sure she paid for what she had done. Karen's house was eerily silent when we arrived. The once chaotic, furious woman had turned into someone who now had no control. It was as if she knew the end was near, but she wasn't going to go down without a fight. We approached the door cautiously, and I could feel the tension rising in the air. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but as the door swung open, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something could go wrong. We moved in, our guns drawn, scanning the rooms one by one. Finally, we found her, standing in the living room, her eyes wild with fear and defiance. She was cornered. There was no escape. Her criminal empire was crumbling before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The agents handcuffed her swiftly, reading her rights as she glared at us, her expression a mix of rage and disbelief. I stood there, watching as the woman who had brought so much pain and suffering to my family was taken away. It wasn't just about her arrest anymore. It was about justice, about ensuring she could never destroy another life with her manipulative ways. As they led her out of the house, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led to this point. What had seemed like an isolated act of violence, the shooting of Mark, had turned out to be the tip of an iceberg, a symptom of a much larger issue. Karen hadn't just been a rogue neighbor. She had been part of a much bigger, much more dangerous game. Her connections to corrupt developers, her secret deals, the manipulation of the HOA system, everything had been carefully calculated. And when someone like Mark stood in her way, she didn't hesitate to eliminate him to protect her empire. But today, that empire had fallen. The weight of her actions, of everything she had done to my family, to our community, was finally coming down on her. She would face the full extent of the law, and no one, not even her, could escape the consequences of her cruelty. As I watched her being driven away, I felt a rush of mixed emotions. Relief, yes, but also a deep sense of sadness. Sadness for the woman who had become so consumed by power and greed that she was willing to sacrifice anything, including innocent lives, to protect her secrets. Sadness for how much damage she had caused, how many lives she had shattered, all in the name of control. But there was also a sense of pride, not in the victory over Karen, but in what it meant for my family. We had survived this storm. We had faced down a woman who had tried to tear us apart, and we had come out stronger on the other side. Mark was recovering, though it would take time. Grace, though forever changed by the trauma, was healing. And I had changed too. In the days that followed, as we moved forward with the legal process, I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything that had happened. This journey had changed me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. It wasn't just about fighting Karen or exposing her criminal empire. It was about what I learned about myself, about my family, and about the lengths I would go to protect the ones I love. I had always prided myself on being someone who could keep things in perspective, who could stay calm and level-headed under pressure. But this experience had tested me in ways that no training or experience could have prepared me for. I had faced a threat that went beyond physical violence. It was a threat that targeted my family, my community, and my sense of safety. And in the face of that threat, I had learned something invaluable: the power of resilience. It was easy to feel helpless in a situation like this. When someone like Karen has control over the community, when she has the resources and the connections to manipulate everything around her, it's easy to feel like there's nothing you can do. But in the end, it wasn't Karen's power that won, it was the truth. It was the courage of standing up, of refusing to be intimidated, of fighting back, even when everything seemed stacked against us. In the quiet moments after everything was over, I couldn't help but think about how much this had changed my perspective on justice. It wasn't enough just to arrest Karen, to take her down. The real victory was in the knowledge that my family and my community had fought back. We had shown that no one, no matter how powerful or manipulative, could escape the truth forever. I sat down with Grace and Mark in the days following the arrest, trying to help them process what had happened, trying to offer them comfort. Mark was healing physically, but I knew it would take time for the emotional scars to fade. Grace, too, was struggling with the trauma, trying to find a sense of peace in the aftermath of it all. But as we sat together, I realized that we had something Karen had never had: the love and support of each other. That was the foundation that had carried us through this ordeal. And no matter what happened next, no matter the challenges we faced, we would face them together. As I sat there, reflecting on everything that had transpired, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the lessons I had learned. We had survived not because we were invincible, but because we had each other. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. Looking back, I couldn't help but be reminded of the one thing I had always known: that justice wasn't about punishment alone. It was about ensuring that people who had done wrong couldn't continue to harm others. And as I watched Karen's empire crumble, I knew we had achieved that. We had brought her down, not just for what she had done to us, but for all the lives she had manipulated, all the people she had hurt. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. And as I walked away from the courthouse, the sun setting behind me, I knew that the fight wasn't over. There would always be more battles to fight, more injustices to uncover. But for now, for this moment, I could breathe a little easier knowing that we had done what we set out to do. We had protected our family, and we had brought justice to those who needed it most. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. As we close out this harrowing chapter of our lives, I want to take a moment to reflect on what we've just gone through and why it's so important that we keep telling these stories. Stories of injustice, stories of standing up for what's right, stories of how one person's actions can send shockwaves through an entire community. Stories like the one you just heard, where a corrupt, power-hungry individual nearly destroyed everything we've worked so hard to build, and how, despite the odds, justice found its way to the truth. But here's the thing: this story, our story, is not unique. There are countless people out there right now, in every corner of the world, who are facing similar situations. They are up against individuals or systems that seem untouchable, that are using their positions of power to control, manipulate, and exploit others. And for those people, our story is a beacon of hope. The fight for justice is never easy. It's full of obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But just like we stood up and refused to let Karen's corruption tear us apart, you too can stand up. You can take action. And if you see injustice, if you see someone trying to take advantage of the vulnerable, you don't have to sit back and watch it happen. You can be the change you want to see in the world. So, if this story resonated with you, if you were moved by the courage it took to fight back against an oppressive system, I want you to take a moment and hit that subscribe button on our channel, the HOA Stories. Why? Because the more subscribers we have, the more stories we can share. The more we can shed light on the darkness that exists in our communities and help others find their own strength in the face of adversity. Like, comment, and share now. It's not just about subscribing. If you were inspired, if you found something in this story that sparked something inside you, I want you to like this video, not just because it's a great story, but because every like we get helps push the message further, helps get this story out to more people who need to hear it. The more likes, the more we can spread the message of resilience, justice, and hope. And comment, I want to hear from you. Your thoughts, your feelings, your own experiences. Maybe you've had to stand up against someone who abused their power. Maybe you've been in a similar situation where it felt like the odds were stacked against you. I want to know your stories. I want to build a community here on the HOA Stories where we share not just stories of struggle, but stories of triumph. We can learn from each other, grow together, and support one another. But most importantly, I want you to share this story. Share it with your friends, your family, your coworkers. Share it with anyone who might need to hear it. Share it with those who are currently facing their own battles with corruption, those who might feel powerless against the systems that are trying to break them. Share it with people who might need a reminder that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way out, there's always hope. The truth is, the more we speak up, the more we amplify these stories, the more we empower others to take action. And that's how we create change. That's how we make the world a better place. By refusing to sit in silence and letting injustice go unchecked, by standing up and speaking out. You might not think your voice matters, but I'm here to tell you it does. One voice, raised in protest, can echo through generations. One story, shared with the world, can inspire others to act. One act of courage, no matter how small it seems, can set off a ripple that changes everything. Why this matters, what Karen did, what she tried to do, wasn't just about breaking the law. It wasn't just about shooting my son-in-law or trying to control a neighborhood. It was about breaking the spirit of the people she targeted. It was about making them feel small, helpless, and powerless. But we didn't let her win. We didn't back down. We fought back and we exposed the truth. And that's why this channel exists, to tell the stories of people who refuse to stay silent, who refuse to let injustice slide. And just think about it. What if Mark hadn't spoken up? What if he hadn't uncovered her schemes? What if no one had stood up against her? It's easy to think that one person's voice doesn't matter, but this story is proof that it does. Each action we take, each time we say no to injustice, we push back against the darkness. And we make it just a little bit brighter for those who will come after us. So, I challenge you to be that person, the one who speaks up when no one else will, the one who refuses to let corruption, greed, or injustice go unchallenged, the one who stands for what's right even when it seems like the odds are against you. Because in the end, that's what truly matters. Stay tuned for more. And don't think this is the last you'll hear from us. There are plenty more stories to tell, more stories of people who have been wronged, more stories of people fighting back, more stories of justice being served, no matter how long it takes or how difficult the road is. The HOA Stories is just getting started, and we've got a lot more to share with you. We'll continue to explore the ways corruption and abuse of power happen in neighborhoods, in communities, and in every corner of society. But we'll also continue to share the victories, the moments when justice prevails, when good people stand up, and when truth shines through the lies. Because those victories matter. And those victories need to be seen. They need to be heard. If you've enjoyed this video, if it moved you in any way, if it reminded you that standing up against injustice is worth the fight, please make sure to subscribe to the HOA Stories. Share this message with others. Comment below and let us know your thoughts. Like this video to show your support for the fight for justice. And remember, every time you hit that share button, you're helping to make the world a little bit better. You're helping to spread the message that injustice will not stand unchallenged. The time to act is now. The fight for justice doesn't end when the video ends. It continues with you. It continues with every action you take, every story you share, and every person you inspire to stand up for what's right. So, let's keep this momentum going. Let's keep fighting. Let's keep exposing the truth. And let's make sure that no matter what, justice always wins. Thank you for watching, and remember, the HOA Stories is more than just a channel, it's a movement. A movement of people who believe in the power of truth. A movement of people who know that, together, we can make a difference. So, subscribe, stay tuned, and let's make sure the voices of those who fight for justice are never silenced. Justice never sleeps. Neither should we.